Prashant Tandon. He is the co-founder and CEO from One Engine. And now let me introduce our special guest, Mr. Deep Kalra. He is the founder and CEO from MakeMyTrip.com. I would request all the delegates to keep posting their questions in the chat box, and we will address selected questions at the end of the session. Over to you, Mr. Tandon.
Thank you. So it's an honor and privilege for me to be here today speaking with Deep as we talk about India's digital story for the next decade. I think amongst this entire generation of tech entrepreneurs, if there's one person who has seen it all, starting from 2000 and having been through a lot of cycles as is natural for the industry that we work in, Deep has had a ringside view of a lot of changes and disruptions and how they impact our lives from actually being a player in the space. And Deep, great to have great to have the opportunity to chat with you. We are coming out of a pretty turbulent year, and I think you've seen a lot of turbulence through the last 20 years. This year seemed particularly nasty from a bunch of vantage points. I really want to get your broad thoughts on how was this year. There's so many things that happened, and I specifically also would like you to talk about. There was a phase where you come from an industry that I think was particularly battered, felt the brunt of this upheaval. And at the same time, you managed to find time and bandwidth to participate in social causes, participate in government programs. Also want to talk about a bunch of those things before we start crystal balling into the future. So let's first hear your thoughts on how was the year.
Yeah, sure, Prashant. So firstly, thanks so much for the warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you. I just realized, we haven't chatted in a long time, which we were doing quite a bit in the early stages of the pandemic. So it's always nice to chat with you. Thank you for that. I like what you said about having seen it all. So I have to say something, despite 20 and going on the 21st year. So this 31st of March, Make My Trip completes 21 years of existence as a company, which is obviously a long time, especially for our young entrepreneurial friends out there. But it doesn't seem like a long time if you're having fun. But whenever you think you've seen it all, let me tell you, something comes along which takes you completely by surprise. And that has been the tsunami called COVID. I mean, really, I don't think anyone, of course, had never seen COVID-19. But more importantly, I don't think anyone in our economy had seen a situation like this and how to deal with it. So for me, it's been, this whole period has definitely been one about learning a lot. And it's not like you go into it and you say, oh my God, we're in lockdown, no one's traveling, nothing's happening, and let's start learning. No, it doesn't happen that way, let's face it. I mean, the learning only comes later. So the first reaction, of course, March, and maybe it'll be fair to say, I think in Feb, we started getting ready for it. In fact, I think we as a company, we as an industry, and we as an economy should have been better prepared, given that we know what happened in China, which started as late as December 19, and therefore it's called COVID-19 really, and Jan and Feb. And then when the whole world was saying it's a Chinese thing, we also saw it spread to Europe. So it was pretty bad in Italy, and then it was pretty bad in a few other countries. And we seem to have explanations as a world for every other country. We had an explanation, I remember, for Italy, a lot of Chinese travel there. We had an explanation for Iran, and we had an explanation for Spain. But the reality is it was coming. No one knew how bad. So we did start to get people ready to work from home, and more importantly, to move some of our processes, particularly post-sale service. We got ready to move that to home. So I think we got a little bit of lead time, but even on March 24th, when we were hit with the thunderclap of shutdown, I don't think we were fully ready to service everyone from home. And there was a lot of servicing involved. Because while people weren't booking new flights, definitely they were interested in cancellations and reschedules and refunds. Refund goes on even today. I'm happy to talk about it because I think what the airlines end up doing is our bane because we have to face the customer very often. But anyway, that's another issue. So I think the first month or month and a half we spent, Prashant, flat out trying to move to a fully remote setup. In fact, we were also part of the whole pressure on the DOT to allow service to be done remotely, etc. And I'm glad that they allowed it because technically it was not even legal to terminate the call in different places other than the venue that you had stipulated. So we've spent a lot of time with that, with our tech people and product people. So it actually helped us make a very robust, of course, scalable, but more important, remote process for managing customers from anywhere, from people sitting at home, where we are even today. So while offices have been open, on any typical day, we only have 5 to 10% of the full workforce come in. And it's not like we are asking people to come. It's open. If you want to come, let us know. And we will prep in such a way, the admin will prep in such a way that you can have meeting with a lot of space. And we want to keep that going because there are certain meetings you need people to come. Certain critical functions do come in with all precautions, etc. So the next phase was very interesting. The next phase, which was again in partial lockdown, so no one was traveling. So let's not forget the first quarter that we reported of lockdown, which was April, May, and June, Q1 of this fiscal, our revenue shrank 95.5%. I have to repeat that number. Our revenue number was, we were 4.5% of the last year, same quarter. Can you even imagine? But that was the same for every travel company around the world, pretty much. And that 4.5%, you could well ask, where did that come from?
Exactly.
Quarantine, we were helping hotels get quarantine,
Right.
etc. Because it was total lockdown for 2 months. And even after that, very few flights. Thankfully, the next quarter after that, we came close to 20. And today, I'm very happy to report while we report the quarter only after about a week from today, happy to report that on the domestic side, in fact, these are public numbers. DGCA just released the numbers. About 56% is the recovery for domestic passengers of pre-COVID levels. So between 50 and 60%. Domestic hotels also at about half clip, so about 50%. Of course, ARRs and ASPs are down, and we can talk about that if we need to, but at least domestic is coming back, a little bit of international. You and I were chatting just before this, and happy to hear you did 2 domestic trips. Most of my friends have done multiple trips. We, for one, have managed to do 4 or 5 trips. And, I believe if we don't travel, how can I expect my customers to travel? So the next quarter we spent, Prashant, without the pressure. So what was the opportunity? The opportunity was you did not have the daily pressure of work and daily fires. When daily fires happen, what at least happens in our company and a few other companies where I have some vantage point to look into them, happens in the same thing, which is the big projects that you want to do, tech projects, big, hairy, audacious goals, as we call them, they never get done or they never get full focus because work gets in the way and they're daily pressure. So people get really, they said, oh, but this crisis happened, mini crisis. So now guess what? We said, listen, there's no daily pressure. There is hardly any revenue coming. We've taken care of all the post-sale service remotely. Let's address the big ones. So we virtually flipped the priority order of our projects. छोटे मोटे project हमने कहा छोड़ दो, बड़े projects पे focus करो, and that really helped us. So the next quarter and a half, I think we got some really big unification projects done, which we couldn't do otherwise. 3 years ago, we had got Go IBBO, and we were still trying. In certain cases, we had merged things. Our chatbots were on different platforms. We managed to put that in a common platform. We did a ton of work which would have never got done. So actually, we ran into a phase where our tech guys, product guys, design guys, and some key business guys were getting burnt out. So they were actually working harder, and maybe this resonates with a lot of folks out there. They were actually working harder in lockdown because there was no timing, there was no Saturday, there was no Sunday. That phase, I think, got over today. I think I'd like to say that the company is probably working to maybe 70 to 80% productivity. I think 100% is hard because many other things get in the way. But we are very happy to see business come back. So I think for me, in my position, it's been about learning on how to deal with such a crisis if it were to happen again. So first phase for our business, definitely for travel, was how do we ensure we survive? So it was really the survival phase.
Yeah.
The second phase was how do we revive? And eventually we hope we'll thrive. So I think my first reaction along with Rajesh, my co-founder, and other key people was, listen, we have no control of revenues. The only thing we have control of is costs. So what do we do with costs? So I think we became pretty maniacal about cutting costs, and I'm glad we did. We cut, obviously, variable costs went very quickly. So whether it was marketing, PG, and all that, that goes away very quickly. But even if you looked at outsourcing costs, we had some very tough conversations, and we started cutting back as much as we could. Even fixed and semi-fixed costs. So even on rentals, we've given up some space. We've renegotiated some space. We've given up satellite offices. The one thing we really didn't want to touch was people. But to be honest, in travel, it didn't last too long. For 2 months or so, we thought we can manage by just reducing comp for the senior levels. And we took drastic cuts at the top. In some cases, they're still not fully restored because that's the nature of our business, and we think we should lead from the front. But I think on the comp side, after 2 months, it became clear that we were hurting people who were working very hard. We started seeing attrition. So when burnout happens, attrition also happens. Other industries, including yours, were doing well and they were hiring. And if you look at engineers, product folks, they're largely industry agnostic. A lot of them were freaked out about travel, etc. So people started to leave. We got rumblings. So then we did take a call, and a very tough call, but we had to let go of almost 10.5% of our workforce, which in this 20 year history, I can tell you is the single hardest decision I've had to take. It's horrible. It's obviously much worse for the person who is laid off, but I can tell you as an entrepreneur, it's very painful. We normally we single people out and we single them out for performance, we give them chances, but when it's no fault of yours, and sadly, many of them were travel folks. So these travel folks we knew will not get jobs so easily. We tried to make it very easy for them. We gave them soft landings, a lot of official extra help, a lot of personal help, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, we needed to do that so that we are not unfair to the people who are there. That was a big learning. Learning number one: keep your costs as variable as possible. Right. So really, the first.
Deep, but I would love to get your perspective more on that particular phase, because I think all of us were going through that challenging situation where costs had to be brought down, and and different companies took different approaches. And I think at the broad level, some approach was that let's cut down democratically, the entire company takes a hit, and the other was let's ring fence and let go. So clearly, you made the transition from A to B, and it had to happen. And was it any different for different functions, or how did you really get to that thought process?
It's a great question, Prashant. You're absolutely right. We started with A because that is our DNA. So we tried to make it very democratic. At the top, we took 100% cut. Our leadership team took a 50% cut in comp for several months. It went on, and then down the line till managerial level, we asked for a 10% cut, and most took it. But my learning is people will not say that they're not happy because they will respect your decision. This is India. This is not the US. This is not some other country where people say, hey, I'm not going to take this. This is illegal, or this is not right, etc. I'm working 100%. In India, there's a lot of deference to senior leadership, to authority. So people will politely take it, but then they'll do what they have to do as they process it. And if at the same point of time they're getting an offer which was anyway 25% higher, now it looks great. Also, the outlook of travel looks bad. So my learning really is, one, we have to keep fixed costs as low as possible, which we can in our businesses. We tend to bloat up. We should not. Our biggest fixed cost is people and rent. I mean, the rest could be like server charges, etc., which is critical. But even there, you can look at burstability, and maybe the cloud becomes even more important so long as your fixed charge of the cloud's not so expensive, etc. So I think that is one. The second one is, I think the easiest thing we do in good times is start throwing people at problems. So we start hiring up. That's our first reaction in many businesses, right? We are not that Puritan and that pure play. In India, I don't even know if there's a single company like that. But overseas, what comes to mind is what WhatsApp used to be, 42 people when it was bought by Facebook, etc. So I don't think we are Puritan. We have a lot of other issues which aren't solved purely by product and tech. So we'll throw people, we'll throw a bunch of people. It starts with 2, 5, 10, and then many areas that starts happening, and you take up people. I think we never realize that overnight we might have to cut back on those very same people. So what we have started doing internally is thinking really hard about every hire now, which is, it's not like we're not hiring, by the way, we're back to hiring on product and tech and dev, some replacement hiring. But on the travel side of the business, if I just take you into our industry for a minute, it was very clear that inbound travel, people coming to India, was going to dry up, which is small for us. It was very clear that corporate travel is going to take a long time to revive. Within corporate, it was very clear that MICE, which is the meeting incentive conferences business, is completely going to implode, because even when corporate comes back, I think the last thing people want to do is have 500 guys in a room or go to a big offsite. I mean, you still might do a leadership team offsite with 10 people, and everyone has their room, but the typical big event and all not going to happen. So we did, and even on outbound international, we knew it will take a long time till borders get opened up. That was pretty clear. Even today, there are still a handful of places Indians can go to on a tourist passport. That's pretty much it. And who knows how that pans out, but hopefully the worst is behind us. So we did then ring fence. We did get into the areas where people were very busy and would stay busy, and the areas which are going to stay impacted for long. And then we had to take the hard decisions out there. So yeah, I think for me, the big learning is definitely scaling up, scale up with variable costs. Don't scale up with fixed costs. It can be very painful when you have to let it go. But just to complete that story, because we did that, Prashant, I think we ended up in a scenario where, believe it or not, the last quarter we reported, our burn, our loss was actually less than our loss in the same quarter last year and in the next quarter. So we actually reduced our burn to single digit level. And that, I think, was, a really positive sign, because our investors, we are obviously listed. So when we reported our earnings call, people were like, I think they were pretty happy with that. And so sometimes you wonder, how is the stock doing so well? Of course, some of it is what we'll get into, crystal ball gazing for our industry and otherwise. So the stock's doing great. Why is the stock doing great? Because of the expectation, but I think also because the market says, okay, this company knows how to manage its costs. And there's no other way. I think our responsibility, the first responsibility, is actually to our stakeholders. I mean, that's the whole function of being a company, and stakeholders are customers, employees, and shareholders. So it's the whole thing, and you have to do the right thing, however hard it is. So yeah, huge learning.
Yeah, no, I think totally. These are important learnings, and I hope everyone who went through this would have come out wiser, having gone through this year. And I think just we also spoke about the way the office right now is still at work from home, or 5 to 10% coming. How do you see the future of work? Is there a fundamental shift we are thinking? And then in some ways it directly impacts your industry as well. So just your thoughts on, because work from home becomes reality, people live closer to hometowns and come in as and when required. There's a positive side and the flip side to the future of work. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's still evolving. I don't think anyone can give a date when all service offices. So firstly, let's break up the nature of work, right? So all of us have friends and family who are in manufacturing. There was no choice. They've gone back to work since quite long. And these guys have been back at work with all precautions. And yet there are people catching the infection, because if someone gets it and you have factory people, etc., working together, even the mask sometimes fails. Let's talk about our industry, where it's largely service oriented. It's largely people working on computers and having meetings pretty much, and not manufacturing anything where they need to be physically present. So we are sending 56% of domestic flyers, of which our market share has actually gone up, and we are doing that sitting at home. That's what I tell our people. Imagine, and with no stress. So that is the magic of what we do, and all other businesses. I mean, we have friends in e-commerce, or someone like you who's an e-pharmacy kind of business and health business, or people are working from home and managing. Of course, your warehousing people are out there. They are doing what they have to do, and there are risks that they have to take. So I think we are in the phase where do what is critical and what is absolutely necessary, you ask people to come physically in for. So we have our own cadence. So once a week, people are doing their meetings in large rooms, large halls, calling a few people. Some guys have been more kind of, I think, interesting and taking the advantage of better weather right now in Delhi, etc., and meeting, their teams outside, which is probably they say about 10 times safer. And that might be a very smart thing to do because you have that physical contact, etc. We're doing walking meetings. We're doing various things what we can walking with mask kind of meetings. So I think all of that is happening. But I think we're going to see a step function. So Prashant, slowly people are getting now in India, the numbers, let's just assume apples to apples. I mean, of course, we know most of rural India doesn't get tested, right? Our numbers cannot be in the teens. So if we have, 16,000 new infections a day, compare that with a tiny country like Switzerland, which till 2 weeks ago had 5,000. It's just not possible. The reason is that people in smaller cities, towns, and all are just, they don't believe, Corona comes to them at all. So I think whatever our number is, it's come down appreciably. There's no pressure on the hospitals right now. There are enough beds available. So it's come down a lot, which is getting people more confident. So I think with every passing week, people are getting a little bit more confident. Now, this is human nature. The vaccine has been announced only 2 days or 3 days of people getting vaccinated. Well, Saturday it started. So we can say 4 days has happened. But suddenly people are feeling buoyant. So there's human nature. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We don't even know how it behaves. So I think we'll see gradually people getting a little bolder, but then the big step function is going to happen when the vaccine's available freely, where we will turn to guys like you and to tell us how do we get the private vaccine if we are ready to pay for it, etc. I think all of that is going to evolve. So I'm less bothered about that. I'm more bothered about people traveling and keeping the protocols while traveling. So I'm really excited to see international borders open up where countries, we and many other countries were blocked out from traveling to many countries because we had 90,000 infections a day. Hey, what happened? We're now 16,000 infections. Why would you not, find reciprocal countries where a lot of Indians like to travel for whatever purpose and use testing as the regime? Still insist on testing. I think India has actually handled some parts of the crisis very well. So, our old rule of getting tested when you're coming in here now is several months old. RT-PCR test taken 72 hours in advance, uploaded, is probably one of the smartest things you can do. In addition to that, can you test on arrival? Perhaps. So I was very impressed to see in Srinagar airport. So we went Srinagar over the New Year, Srinagar and Gulmarg, each and every arriving traveler was tested with a full-blown test. This was the nasal swab, but rapid.
Okay.
And for some reason, you were allowed to go, but if you were positive, then you were contacted, traced down. So I was telling them, why don't you just hold people for 15, 20 minutes or an hour or whatever it is? But everyone was getting tested. So the numbers in the valley are pretty low. So I think there's a double testing regime which can be done to open up travel. I'd like to talk about common pass because that's relevant to everyone listening. Because I think if there's one thing people are dying to do and they haven't done is travel a lot. By now, Prashant, you would have had 6 trips in this pandemic and 10 official trips. You've had 2 personal trips, which is not bad, by the way. That's the average. So Common Pass is a really exciting project. It started in the US. World Economic Forum has been pushing it. We've signed up as partners to it, where now earlier it was testing, now it'll be the vaccine. So basically imagine an electronic format with which your testing history or your vaccine history is automatically loaded up and given to the airline first. Many airlines are part of this. Eventually, hotels will be part of it. And they already know that you're vaccinated twice on so and so date, 42 days have elapsed, etc. So, they're good to go kind of thing. So there's a big movement. We've got United pioneered with it on November 16th. They did a flight from Newark to London, where everyone got tested on premise on Newark Airport. And then Cathay did something similar, which they did from Hong Kong to Singapore. So more and more airlines are coming together to be part of this. I think that might become part of the protocol. So your travel document might actually carry something about your being vaccinated and what your history is with the virus, which I think will be then interpreted differently.
And I believe one could now also add people who have recovered and have antibodies at least for the
Exactly.
6 8 months as a part of the travel pass. Hopefully, those things will be coming also.
You're
Um,
absolutely right. You're absolutely.
yeah,
That's the whole point. Your virus history.
yeah. So we got another only 5 minutes left, and I think one point these conversations flow fast. One point I wanted to get your thoughts on was this entire. How do you see the next 10 years in terms of? I think there's a big debate on the global players versus Indian players. One is in the domestic market. How do you see the markets play out? And you have been one of those which has the Indian players standing tall despite all global players coming in and out. But as the global tech giants grow stronger and inherent advantages are becoming obvious, how do you see the ecosystem play out in that regard? And the second part to that would be Indian players actually going global. Do you see any of that happening in the coming decade in a bigger way?
Yeah, it's a very very relevant question, and I think we've got to be cognizant of the fact that India early on, I think, took a very laissez-faire policy, right? It was
Hmm.
free trade, it was open to all, so much so to the chagrin of many of the local players. I think we actually made it easier for foreign players to work in India. And I've taken that up many times. The government has come down on that. So many foreign players, even in our space, were able to avoid taxes and or pay a pittance of taxes because they were billing from overseas. A lot of that is getting blocked, but we all know the creative structures that exist. And without taking names, I think while that gets cleaned up, there's no denying the fact that India is an open economy. We are nothing like China. So we are the exact opposite. We're probably not even like Europe, I think, because in Europe, you have very, very tough laws around monopolistic practices and privacy. And I think our laws are still evolving in that. So we have a regime where everyone's here, everyone's invited or not, but everyone's here for a market which today is not that large, Prashant. So that's the scary part. I mean, sometime back, the online advertising market was actually fairly modest in size. And of that, Google used to eat most of it up and Facebook came along, etc. So I think it's going to be pretty hard for local players who don't have the resources. I think it comes down to that. I think we have some
Yeah.
great local players. Some of them, have really, really understood the customer well and built a very strong connect with customer. But my only advice to them would be then to get the resources needed to battle it out. Do not think that you can battle some of the large players coming in, and if they get into your market by just holding on to your old customers. No, these things change very fast. Money plays a huge role because you're able to actually, get in for the long haul. We've all now seen so many battles in India, which are getting a little saner right now, but with discounting. And for that, you need not $100 million, you get into the billions of dollars. Or you look at India's fintech industry, we have so many players. I think we have more than 100 players in fintech, if you think about it. But to make money in traditional fintech or new fintech is pretty hard because I think there's no money in the wallet. So you get a lot of customers, but what we have seen post UPI is the democratization of that, and suddenly you have a total change in the pecking order of wallets. So you got different players who were nowhere 2 years ago emerge as the leaders. And but how long can you do that if you're not making money there? So where will you make money there? I think eventually, and therefore, do you have the fuel to last that course? So that would be my advice to local players. Many of them have fantastic, connect with customers, first name recall, top of the mind, etc. But that can move very fast. That can go away very fast. So be very sure that you're constantly not only innovating and evolving and getting closer to customer, but also ensure that you've got, enough reserves in the tank. If it comes in for a dogfight, then you're ready for it.
Hmm. And and I think the one challenge is that many of these players can play the 20-year game with infinite capital. They don't need to make money. So does regulation have a important role here?
Absolutely. I think regulation has a huge role to play. And we have to be more in sync with what's happening internationally, we should learn from what has happened in certain markets. So, I think we can't take that long in certain cases to do a study and then to come back, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
regulation has a very, very important role to play. I think it's getting better and better. But clearly, this till no smart company or entrepreneur can wait for regulation and say, "Oh, that will take care of it." No, please take care of yourself first. Next COVID-19 crisis can come, which can again be the next tsunami. That same learning. What's the learning out there? Have enough reserves. Keep your costs, fixed costs as low as possible, as well as competition from international players. So you might be fantastic today, but are you ready now to function for the next 2 years with your entire profit pools being eroded? Or wherever your margins are, if they were to go down -5%, can you function? So please simulate that, have those projections in front of you, and say, now what do I need for that? So I think there's no question but being ready for more crises like this.
Mm-hmm. And all said and done, uh, what does the next decade look like? Is it how do you see it? Are you optimistic, positive? Are you thinking that these are going to be more challenging times? What's the outlook?
So I think if you take a time frame of a decade, Prashant, there's no denying that this decade will belong to India. There's just no denying that India will finally present, the Indian market, the Indian economy will finally present the face that everyone's been investing behind, right? As we move from, we won't probably in this decade go from 2,000 to $6,000 per capita, but my estimate will probably end up at closer to four, $5,000 dollars per capita, which is huge, which is when magic starts happening. So why I'm saying that is because I think we are going to have more cycles. We'll have fantastic cycles of prosperity, and then we'll have sharp, sharp cliffs and troughs where we will have some other crisis. So that's been the learning. I mean, if you look at the financial crisis has happened, you look at this. So these cycles have become sharper but shorter. So the recovery is also great. See, fundamentally, there's a lot of capital available internationally. There's just
Yeah.
tons of pools of capital, and they're looking for good companies. So I think India will be the beneficiary. I mean, the fact that India has attracted what 10, $11 billion in startups during the pandemic. So what are we talking about, right? So there's enough capital. So I think
Mm-hmm.
India will definitely blossom overall in this decade in a huge way. We're seeing the beginning of a real ecosystem. We're seeing so many companies come out of nowhere and become really, so it's very exciting to see for the first time in India now you can, if ask someone name the top 20, 30 companies, and they can keep naming more and more and more companies because they're good companies in every space. So I think that's pretty exciting. So I'm very positive on India.
All right. Thank you, Deep. I think we have to wrap up the session. This conversation could go on forever, but I think if there's a key takeaway, one is directionally, it's sunrise time. It's the time for India. Having said that, we will have sharper peaks, sharper troughs, more. The beta in the market will be higher. There will be uncertainty, and the players who succeed are the ones who can deal with it the best they can. So I think with that, thank you, Deep, for your time today. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and look forward to continuing our conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Prashant. Thanks, IAMAI. It's been great, and wish you a great conference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Tandon. Thank you, Mr. Kalra. Another thanks to our diamond partner, Google, platinum partners Inmobi and Facebook, digital growth partner, Microsoft, omni-channel partners, and this customer experience partner, Adobe, customer engagement partner, Information. Please stay tuned for other exciting discussions. Thank you.